3-year-old girl points at police dog German Shepherd in courtroom, says 2 words. What happens next is unthinkable. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of the downtown courthouse, casting long beams of golden light across the cold marble floor. Inside courtroom 7, attorneys in dark suits shuffled papers. Bailiffs whispered instructions and the low murmur of the audience filled the air. It was supposed to be a routine criminal hearing. Another case on the docket, another witness to testify. No one expected anything unusual. Sitting quietly on the wooden bench near the front row was 3-year-old Emma Reynolds, her small hands holding a soft plush bunny against her chest. Her brown curls were tied back with a faded pink ribbon, and her wide eyes darted around the vast courtroom. She wore a yellow dress with little sunflowers printed along the head. Next to her sat her mother, Rachel, adjusting the collar of her blazer and trying to appear composed. Rachel had been called as a witness in an ongoing case involving a string of warehouse robberies. She had seen something or someone through her kitchen window 6 months earlier, a masked figure fleeing the scene. She had not been able to identify the person, but her testimony about the direction and time of the escape was still considered important, with no one available to care for Emma that morning. The judge had reluctantly allowed the child to remain in the courtroom so long as she stayed quiet. At exactly 9:03 a.m., the side door opened and the security officers filed into the room. Leading them was Officer David Cross, the K-9 handler assigned to courtroom duty for the day, followed by Rex, a black and tan German Shepherd with sharp eyes and a powerful gait. Rex walked beside Officer Cross with military precision, his harness gleaming, his posture alert. The courtroom continued without interruption. Judge Ellen Mathers entered and called the court to order. As the opening remarks began, Emma shifted slightly in her seat and turned to look toward the officers, her eyes locked onto Rex. She stared completely still. Then, without warning, Emma's small voice rang out across the silent courtroom. 2 words spoken with quiet clarity, but with the force of an earthquake. Bad man, everything stopped. The stenographer's fingers hovered over the keyboard. The prosecutor's head turned sharply. Even the judge paused mid-sentence. All eyes fell on the child. Rachel gasped and bent down. "Emma, what did you say?" she whispered, panic creeping into her voice. Emma, undeterred, raised her arm slowly and pointed, not at the dog, but at Officer Cross. Her lips trembled, but she repeated herself more clearly this time. "Bad man." The courtroom descended into stunned silence. Officer Cross froze. His expression, once firm and composed, shifted almost imperceptibly. A flicker of something, fear, recognition, guilt, crossed his face before he recovered and stood straighter. Judge Mathers narrowed her eyes. "Is there a problem?" Rachel flushed, trying to explain. I am so sorry, Your Honor. She must be confused. She is just a child." But Emma did not look confused. She looked certain. She whispered again, eyes never leaving the officer's face. "He locked me." A collective intake of breath swept the room. Assistant District Attorney Michael Green, seated at the prosecutor's table, stood slowly. "Your Honor," he said cautiously, "I would respectfully request a recess." Judge Mathers glanced from Emma to Officer Cross, then nodded. 15-minute recess. Balayaf, escort the officer to my chambers. Now, as the courtroom erupted into murmurs and whispers, Rachel held her daughter close, her heart pounding. Emma clung to her mother, her eyes still fixed on the man in uniform. And Rex, the German Shepherd, turned his head slowly toward his handler, his ears twitching ever so slightly. Outside, the wind picked up, bending the flag at the courthouse entrance. Inside, the storm had already begun. Inside Judge Mathers' chambers, the tension was thick enough to taste. Officer David Cross stood stiffly in front of her desk, arms folded, a practiced calm on his face. But beneath the surface, beads of sweat formed along his hairline. Judge Matz studied him for a long moment before speaking. "You are visibly agitated, Officer Cross," she said flatly. "With respect, Your Honor, I do not appreciate being pulled aside because of a child's outburst," he replied, trying to sound offended rather than unnerved. "She is 3 years old. That is hardly an admissible accusation." Judge Mathers tapped a pen slowly against the wood. The child did not just say, "You are a bad man." She said, "You locked her." That is a serious statement. I will not ignore it. Outside the chamber in a small witness waiting room, Rachel sat in a vinyl chair, clutching Emma close. Her hands trembled. Emma had gone quiet, but her face was pale, her eyes wide and fixed on the door. "She remembers," Rachel whispered, mostly to herself. Detective Elijah Monroe entered, summoned personally by the judge, a respected investigator with 25 years of experience in the department's Internal Affairs Division. Monroe had a reputation for asking questions no one wanted to answer. He knelt beside Emma, keeping his voice gentle and low. "Hi, Emma. My name is Eli. Do you remember where you saw that man before today?" Emma hesitated, pressing her face into her mother's sweater. But after a moment, she pulled back and nodded. "In the dark place with the barking?" Rachel's eyes filled with tears. "What dark place, baby?" Emma pointed downward toward the floor. "It smelled like metal." Monroe frowned. "Did he hurt you, sweetheart?" Emma shook her head, then said something even more chilling. "He hurt the dog." In that instant, Monroe's posture changed. He stood quickly, eyes locked with Rachel's. "You said your daughter had never seen Officer Cross before?" "Never," Rachel said. "We moved to this city 6 months ago. The only time she was ever separated from me was for 2 hours last fall when she got lost during a block party. We found her in a utility shed near the old train depot." "She had scratches, right?" Monroe asked. Rachel nodded. "We thought she had fallen. The shed was locked from the outside. The police said she must have wandered in and pulled the door shut by accident." "And who was the responding officer?" Rachel blinked. "I do not remember. It was late. There were so many lights and people." Monroe turned to the boss. "Get me the incident report from that day. I want the responding officer's name." As they left the waiting room, back inside the courtroom, Rex lay quietly beside the witness stand, his chest rising and falling. But something about his posture had changed. He stared at the closed door behind which his handler had disappeared, his ears upright, his jaw tight. And then with a low sound that was almost a growl, he stood and placed himself directly in front of Emma's chair, like a sentry guarding something precious. The courtroom had not seen the worst yet. The child had remembered, but now the dog had too. Detective Elijah Monroe returned to the courtroom floor with a file gripped tightly in one hand and urgency in his stride. As he approached Judge Matz's bench, she leaned forward, noting the hardened expression on his face. "It is confirmed," Monroe said, keeping his voice low but firm. "Officer David Cross was the first responder to Emma's disappearance last October. He claimed he found her behind a locked shed near the abandoned railard. But here is the problem. His report says she was found crying, disoriented, but unharmed. No mention of scratches, no mention of trauma." Judge Matz narrowed her eyes in the shed. Monroe handed her a photograph from the file. It had an external bolt lock. She could not have locked herself in. And now this, her identifying him unprompted in front of the entire court. The judge exhaled slowly. "We need to move carefully, but I want him held for questioning immediately. Quietly. No scene, no noise. Get the department's psychologists on standby. And Eli, bring the dog." Meanwhile, in the hallway outside the main courtroom, Officer Cross paced back and forth. His jaw was clenched so tightly it made his temples throb. He had survived worse than a child's imagination before, but something about this moment felt different, less controllable. The door opened. 2 uniformed officers flanked Monroe as he stepped into the corridor. "Officer Cross," Monroe said, voice calm but clipped, "you are being placed on administrative hold pending an internal investigation." "You have got to be joking," Cross snapped. "Over what? A toddler pointing her finger? Over a missing child? A false report? And a potential history of abuse involving your canine unit?" Cross froze. "You cannot be serious. That dog is clean." Monroe's eyes did not blink, and yet the dog remembers too. Cross's face twitched, just for a fraction of a second, but Monroe saw it. Inside the courtroom, Emma sat silently on the bench beside her mother, holding a paper cup of apple juice with both hands. She did not drink it. She stared at the door. Then Rex entered, The German shepherd did not trot. He walked slowly, deliberately, his eyes fixed on Emma. Every camera in the room turned. The bailiff paused, unsure whether to intervene, but Judge Matz gave a subtle nod. Let him go. Rex approached the bench and stopped just in front of Emma. He lowered his head, not in submission, but in recognition. He let out one low whine, barely audible. Emma looked up, eyes wide, then slowly reached out and touched his fur. That is him, she whispered. The barking dog. He was there, Rachel gasped. Emma, are you sure? She nodded once, firmly. He was locked too. The room stilled. Monroe stilled to the front. Your Honor, I respectfully request that the court enter a formal motion to begin review of Officer Cross's service history, including all deployments of his canine unit. I also request a medical exam for the animal. Granted, Mathers said without hesitation, and have the department's veterinarian and trauma consultant review the dog within the hour. From the back of the courtroom, a young man in plain clothes stood up. My name is Dr. Javier Benson. I am a trauma behaviorist specializing in military and police dogs. I have been observing since the incident began. With your permission, I would like to examine the dog now. The judge agreed. As Benson approached, Rex showed no signs of fear or hostility, but when Benson gently lifted one of Rex's hind legs to examine the skin underneath, he inhaled sharply. Fresh scars, old burns, lash marks, all consistent with tethering and forced punishment techniques. This dog has been hurt by someone who knew how to conceal it. Monroe turned to the judge. We will need to issue warrants, and I suspect Officer Cross is just the beginning. Judge Mathers looked down at Emma now, quietly cradling Rex's head in her lap. The girl did not speak. She did not need to. Her silence had said everything, and so had the dogs. Detective Elijah Monroe stood before a whiteboard filled with printed files, sticky notes, photographs, and police duty logs. In the center was one name underlined in red ink, Officer David Cross. But what had started as a single case was quickly unraveling into a larger web, one that stretched back years. There are 5 other children, Monroe said, turning to Assistant District Attorney Lorraine Shepard. All found nearer sites where Cross's patrol car logged GPS activity. Each time the child was recovered by him. Each time the reports were vague. Lorraine nodded grimly. The psychological profiles match. Missing for hours. No clear trauma reports. No follow-up and no suspicion, because he was a cop. Outside the conference room, Rex lay curled up near the window, his eyes half closed. But when Monroe stepped into the hallway, the dog stood alert. Ever since being removed from Cross's control, Rex had not barked once. He stayed close to Monroe and Emma. Good boy, Monroe whispered, scratching behind the dog's ear in the pediatric wing of the courthouse clinic. Emma sat quietly on a cushioned bench, coloring with crayons while her mother watched the doorway nervously. Rachel, Monroe said gently, we need to ask Emma one more question. Her hand trembled slightly as she nodded. I will stay beside her. Dr. Benson, the trauma behaviorist, knelt at Emma's level. Emma, he said in a warm, even tone, do you remember where you saw Rex before the court? Emma set her crayon down. Her eyes flicked to her mother, then to Monroe, then finally to Rex, who was sitting motionless nearby. He barked at the man, she said quietly. The man heard him when I was crying. Rachel blinked back tears. Was it the same man from the courtroom? Emma nodded. He told Rex to stop barking. Then he pushed him. And what did Rex do? Benson asked. Emma's voice was barely a whisper. He sat by the door. He would not leave. That was the moment Monroe knew. The dog had stayed with her, even in captivity, even while hurt. Back at the police station, digital forensics had uncovered deleted video footage from a patrol car dash cam. Recovered fragments revealed Cross exiting his cruiser in the alley near an abandoned warehouse, the same location where Emma had been found. Get me a full warrant, Monroe said, pushing the evidence to Lorraine. House, car, storage unit, everything. That night, with a judge's emergency signature, law enforcement raided Cross's personal storage facility. What they found was damning. Dozens of files marked with case numbers, photos of children, a camera with encrypted memory cards, and in the far back corner, a kennel cage, small, rusted, with claw marks on the inside. The breath left Monroe's lungs. Rex, he muttered, was locked up in here. Inside the cage was a collar marked with Cross's badge number and a bloody training whip. It was all they needed. Back at the courthouse, Cross sat handcuffed in an interrogation room, his face blank. He had said nothing for hours. But when Monroe walked in with Rex at his side, the officer flinched visibly. Monroe placed a photograph of Emma next to the cage photo on the table she remembered. So did the dog. They told the truth without a single word. Cross looked at the images, then at Rex, who now stood firm and unblinking, facing his former handler. "I will talk," Cross said finally, voice. "But I want protection. I was not the only one. It goes higher, much higher." Outside, the rain had started to fall. Inside, justice had begun to rise. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows of the courthouse, illuminating the mahogany benches and solemn expressions of those in attendance. But today's crowd was different. Reporters filled the aisles. Victims, families sat holding hands. On the far side of the room, a row of uniformed officers sat in silence off duty, but watching, hoping for redemption for a profession that had betrayed its code. At the center of the courtroom, Sergeant David Cross stood at the defendant's table. Shackled, he had pleaded guilty to 6 counts of child endangerment, abuse of authority, and obstruction of justice. His final admission had unraveled a network of corruption that reached 2 senior detectives and a forensic technician who had altered reports to protect him. But the room's attention was not on him. It was on the little girl sitting near the witness stand, feet dangling above the ground, her hand gently resting on the back of the dog seated beside her. Rex, clean, calm, wearing an official K9 therapy vest. He sat without moving, eyes forward. But when Emma shifted or whimpered, his head turned to her instantly. The prosecutor, Lorraine Shepard, approached the bench with a soft expression. "Your Honor, with the court's permission, I would like to make a final statement before sentencing." The judge nodded. Lorraine turned to the gallery. "This courtroom has seen horrors in recent months, evidence of betrayal, manipulation, and cruelty. But it has also seen something extraordinary. Truth revealed not by experts or evidence or cross-examinations, but by a 3-year-old girl who said 2 words. She turned to Emma. When Emma looked at Rex and said, "He stayed," she did not just point out a dog. She pointed out loyalty, protection, a witness. The courtroom was silent. Lorraine continued. "Officer Cross used his badge to shield himself from accountability, but Rex, an animal discarded by the system Crossed, chose to stand with a child, and in doing so, he saved her life." The judge wiped his glasses, clearly moved. "I asked the court to recognize not only the sentence of the guilty," Lorraine added, "but also the need for lasting change. We cannot allow silence to protect the powerful. We must listen, especially when the voice is small or barks." A ripple of emotion moved through the room. At the defense table, Cross did not lift his eyes. The judge nodded solemnly. The court acknowledges the prosecutor's statement. Let the record reflect that the testimony of a child and the behavior of a service animal contributed directly to this conviction. He turned to Cross. "You weaponized trust. Your sentence is 40 years without parole." Gasps echoed softly as Bafes took him away. Emma sat quietly, one hand buried in Rex's fur. Later in the courthouse garden, reporters tried to surround the family. Laura and Emma, now under protection, were ushered away quietly. Monroe knelt beside Emma. "Do you want to say goodbye to Rex?" he asked. Emma frowned. "He is not leaving." Monroe looked at Laura, who nodded tearfully. "We talked. If the department approves, we want to adopt him." Monroe smiled. "He deserves to be with his hero." That evening at a press conference, District Attorney Lorraine Shepard announced a new directive, the Emma Rex Initiative, a sweeping reform mandating third-party oversight of K9 units, improved officer screening, and trauma-informed court protocols for minors across the country. Images of Emma and Rex went viral. The photo of her pointing with those 2 words, "He stayed," became a symbol of justice, innocence, and resilience. In their new home, Emma now slept with Rex curled beside her bed. Some nights she would whisper to him before falling asleep, "You stayed." she would say softly. So I will never be afraid again. And Rex, ever vigilant, would close his eyes, knowing his purpose had finally found a home. Sometimes truth stands in silence, and sometimes it stands on four legs. Thank you for staying with us through this unforgettable journey. Today we witnessed how a child's pure heart and a loyal German shepherd uncovered a truth hidden deep within the walls of justice. Little Emma's voice and Rex's unshakable loyalty reminded us that courage comes in all sizes and heroes do not always wear badges. Some have tiny hands and some four paws. If this story moved you, inspired you, or gave you hope, please subscribe to Amazing Paws Stories. We bring you real, emotional, and heartwarming tales where animals change lives and sometimes even save them. Tap that bell so you never miss the next true story that could touch your heart, because the world needs more stories like this. Stories where love, loyalty, and truth win. From all of us at Amazing Paws Stories, thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next